celebrating the power of possibility.
My name is Michael Greider, and I believe anything is possible.
Welcome to Anything is Possible. These are great stories about great people whose lives prove that anything is possible. My guest today, the one and only Michael Greider, AKA, do you accept the moniker?
Oh, absolutely. You got to embrace it.
They call him Big Sexy. It's great to see you, sir.
Hey, you too, Halloran. You too.
It's an honor to have you here because we've worked together for a long time. Yeah. Let's go back to when I met you. Let's start there, and then we'll kind of jump around.
Sure. Well, I met you before you ever met me, right?
Okay, we got to hear this one.
Well, so many people, I mean, that's just the nature of what you do. I grew up in Oak Ridge, and as I was going to the University of Tennessee from 2001 to 2006, I was studying journalism, electronic media, and was paying attention to the news and was listening to the radio, and decided early on, I've got a face for radio, as people say, right? Me and Dave Folk. And so I started working at the campus radio station and started thinking about where do I want to work and this and that. And so I was listening to news talk. I was listening to WIVK. And I remember listening to you and Angie Wilson cutting up in the mornings, in 04 and 05. And got an internship at WOKI and that was the first time I met you. I worked with you and Chris Marion as an intern. News director, actually, who became my wife. We're now divorced, but she assigned me to a feature story, and it was on 1 year after Hurricane Katrina and the evacuees that were in our community. And I remember sitting down with you, talking about how to tighten up that feature, how to tell that story, because you're.
What did I say? I don't remember.
You're putting me on the spot. I don't even remember. But I'll tell you what I do remember, and it's from Chris. He taught me that the music bed, that non-narration portion of the story, can really move things forward and can set the tone. And he was really the person that drove that home for me. And then you aired my story on your show, and sat down and interviewed me for a couple of minutes to talk about it and to talk about my takeaways from that feature. And I remember, what I do remember is we talked about the three things that really came out, the three F's of the heart of those evacuees. And it was food, it was family, and it was faith. And I thought, you know what, those folks down in Louisiana aren't much different from us here in East Tennessee. So we go back at least to 2005, 2006.
Man, it's a long time. Well, it's good to have you here today. What was it like growing up in Oak Ridge, Tennessee?
Better looking back in some ways than in the moment. Oak Ridge, for me as a kid was sort of, well, I just want to go to Knoxville. I want to get out and go to a big city. I caused a lot of trouble.
Really?
Yes, I caused a lot of trouble.
Tell me about the troublemaker.
The stuff I got caught at, or the stuff I didn't get caught at, right? My mom worked 2 and 3 jobs full time. And so and my parents divorced when I was in 4th grade, and I was fortunate because I have a great dad and I had a great mom. And in many ways, my mom did the best she could and the best she knew how. And so she worked 2 and 3 jobs to make ends meet. Some of that's because she wasn't the best money manager, right? She would spend money on things that we didn't need just to keep up with the Joneses. But that's what she thought she needed to do to be a good mom. But that meant I had a lot of time left to my own devices. And so I got into smoking and weed and stealing and just running around causing normal teenage, teenage destruction. I know, Big Sexy. And then.
Were you just bored?
Bored probably a little bit. There just wasn't a lot to do, but also just sort of making my own way. I was like a lot of kids. You learn through bumping your head and doing knuckleheaded stuff and then having to pay the consequences. And so I sort of learned that way, right? It was, in that sense, it wasn't all that different from how anybody else came up. But I was lucky because even though my mom didn't graduate high school, right? My dad graduated high school in '73 and went straight to work for K-25 out at the plant as a laborer. Nobody in my immediate family had ever gone to college. But
did you have that as an aspiration initially?
Yes. I thought, you know what, I want to go to college, but I didn't know what that meant. My mom didn't know what that meant. But to her credit, more than anything else, she never put blinders on my dreams. She would always make sure that I knew that whatever it was that I wanted to do or could do, that we weren't going to be limited by means, that we would figure out a way to make it happen.
That's awesome.
And so for me, it was never a question of, can I go to college if I'm accepted? It was, do I want to go to college or do I not want to go to college? Because I could do no wrong in my mom's eyes, right? And so, so in that sense, if I'd been, if I'd been a ditch digger, right? I'd be a lot thinner if I was a ditch digger, that's for sure. If I was a ditch digger or if I was a rocket scientist, my mom would be proud of me no matter what. And that's one thing that I'm blessed because I never, ever had to doubt that.
Possibility powered by Covenant Health, Home Federal, and the Knoxville News Sentinel.
Now you can listen while you're on the go with Anything is Possible, the podcast. So you go to the University of Tennessee.
Yeah.
You decide to study journalism, digital media, and you graduate.
Yeah.
And you get this internship. What did you think your life was going to play out to be?
I thought that I was going to go and work my way to New York City or to Chicago or to Atlanta and tell stories and win prizes and that sort of thing. But life had a way of I would say God had a way, even before I knew He was the one working, God had a way of making sure that I realized I'm right where God wanted me to be. And it started, you probably remember because you were covering it too. You were live on the air, making some noise about on January 31st, 2006, when Black Wednesday happened. And there's very little to many people that is more boring than local government. But to me, in that moment and then the subsequent months and years, local government became so interesting to me. And so that started me on a path where in every newsroom that I was in, every news meeting I was in, I was trying to advocate for local coverage of local politics, of local issues. And so that meant that I developed some sources and things like that and contacts, and through those contacts I was connected with then Mayor Tim Burchett. And if you had told me that 4 or 5 years after graduating college that I would be the top communications official in Knox County Government, I would have told you you're crazy, because I was suspicious of the government. I was suspicious of politicians. I didn't want anything to do with that unless I was holding them accountable, right? But God has
I remember when you told me, you're like, hey, the times they are a-changing. Mm-hmm. And when you decided to go to work for then Mayor Burchett, that was a sea change for you.
Yeah, it's a sea change. It was a blessing financially, but it was also a career blessing. I tell people, radio and television, they get in your blood, but they have a hard time getting into your wallet.
That's the truth. It's
the truth. And I was making better money for Tim, but listen, Tim, he's a cheapskate.
He is. He drove that, it was a Jeep.
That Jeep Grand Cherokee.
White, it was old. Uh-huh. The roof was falling down.
Yes.
Every meeting that he went to, he would take his badge off and stick it on the roof of the, I know.
Oh, many times I would put my foot down in July, August, and September and say, listen, if you don't have your air conditioning fixed, we're not riding in your car. Of course, he's the boss, so I lost, but I would try to put my foot down on that. But yeah, so that was interesting. I was, at that point, I think I was 25 years old, top communications official in the county. But the thing was, I was working for a guy who put transparency ahead of everything. Because when we talked about that position, I told him, I said, look, you got to understand, I'm coming from a journalism background. And I'm not going to lie to my former colleagues. I'm not going to mislead the public. I'm not going to mislead reporters. And he said, that's perfect. That's what I want. I want somebody that has a relationship with the news media, that understands the questions that they're going to ask, but more than that, understands sort of what do they need in order to do their job. And so from day one, it was about building and maintaining those relationships, and not about hiding things or anything like that, but rather facilitating conversations, facilitating understanding. And certainly, as with any elected official, there are times when you don't, there are things you've got to speak to and answer and talk about that you don't want to talk about, or there are mistakes that either you make or that your administration makes that you have to answer for. That's just par for the course. Those individual moments or those individual facts are just details.
Right.
What matters is how do you handle those things when you're faced with them.
What'd you learn about that?
I've learned that it's a heck of a lot easier, right, if you just hit things head on. If there's a problem, name the problem and address the problem, and then address how you're going to prevent the problem from happening again in the future. And I learned that from Tim.
First time I saw that in action, not the first time, but one of the times I remember seeing it in action was actually Mike Cohen. There was a situation with the school system, and people were stealing steaks and stuff out of it was a little scandal. Yeah. And I remember calling him or something, and he just said, "We messed up. We're wrong."
Right.
There was no, the blah, blah, blah. So you learned that early on.
I want to say something. Mike Cohen, you brought up Mike. People ask me, who's your mentor? And they expect me to say Tim Burchett. It's not Tim. I love Tim. He's taught me a great deal about politics and how to be a leader and those sorts of things. But my professional mentor is Mike Cohen.
Isn't he amazing?
He's a great guy.
He's a great guy.
He'd be a great guest, is what he would be. Mike and I, so when I was at Channel 8, was a manager in the Channel 8 newsroom, and I was, trying to figure out what am I going to do. News isn't quite, I don't think it is today what I thought it was going to be. The rose-colored glasses were losing their hue, and I looked around and I thought, who's doing what I think I might want to do in the future? And at that time, Mike was working for a big PR firm and had been spokesperson for the county mayor, has been spokesperson for the school system, had been recruited to Knoxville to be a spokesperson for then Mayor Victor Ashe. And so he had done a lot that I had interest in potentially doing in my career. And so I thought, you know what, I've dealt with Mike a little bit. I just called him up out of the blue and said, hey, Mike, we don't know each other very well. Can I take you to lunch? I'd like to pick your brain just about career stuff. We met at Aubrey's on Paper Mill, just like our conversation. I couldn't remember the first thing that he told me today, right? But I remember that he sort of roadmapped some things like, just keep your integrity, right? If I just had to distill it, keep your integrity, work hard, and put yourself in these positions. And so I followed Mike's advice over the next year to a T, and I landed this dream job, that was, and it's not a dream job because it's a government bureaucratic job. I mean, I went from making $37,000 a year in a TV newsroom as a manager to making $54,000 a year. It was not an insignificant pay raise, but it wasn't an ivory tower either, right? My colleague down the hall in the city was making almost twice what I was making, right? Tim Burchett's a cheapskate, but I felt good about going to work for Tim Burchett every day.
You were successful in that position.
Yeah.
Then Mayor Burchett decides that he's going to run for Congress.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
So when we made the announcement that Tim was going to make an announcement about his future, Congressman Duncan almost simultaneously announced that he was going to retire. And so, we ran that race. It was a 7-way primary. There were moments that we talked about, right, that it got pretty negative. And, we talked in our campaign about no matter what, act like you're the front runner, be the front runner. Don't stoop to the negative.
Ooh, that campaign got negative.
It did. Ooh, it got really negative. And what did we do? We hit it head on. We called it out when we saw it. And we answered questions. And we beat a 7-person field with half the vote. The second place finisher was still 12 points behind Tim, and then the best of the rest. That just shows that, and I have to believe it's still true, that running a positive campaign on issues, on things that matter to people, fighting against the negativity can still win.
Now, take us with you with Anything is Possible, the podcast. Stream new episodes weekly wherever you get your podcasts.
What'd you learn in Washington?
Best thing I learned is there's no place like home.
You were there January 6th.
Yes, yeah. So Tim took office in Congress on January 3rd, 2019, in the middle of the longest government shutdown in U.S. history. Within the first year, we had the first impeachment of President Trump. Started, at least. By March of the second year, we were in a global pandemic. Then we had the election in November. All of the riots and the protests in the streets. I mean, DC was businesses boarded up and graffiti and damage everywhere. I mean, I could hear the flash bangs going off from my apartment building. I mean, it was, or whatever it was that they were popping off. I mean, it was not a fun time to be in Washington. And then January 6th happened. And because it's January 6th, all we were going to do was certify the election. And so I remember about noon, Tim said, I got to walk over and sign a discharge petition or something like that. And so he's like, you guys want to walk with us? So we walked outside across Independence Avenue, along the east front of the Capitol, up the House chamber steps from the outside, and stopped and just looked out. And there were probably 45, 50 people out there, a couple of stages. Somebody was praying over here. Somebody was playing folk music over there. I mean, I said, this isn't quite the protest that everybody said it was going to be. An hour later, it was insane. It was insane. And Tim was on the House floor. Kelsey and I were in our office in the Longworth House office building. And we're watching the news and could see some of the images. And we were on the main level, the street level. So I said, Kelsey, I'm going to go up and just see if I can see out the front door. So I walked up to the front door, and there were a group of 4 Capitol Police officers talking, and I peeked out the door, and you could see the crowd, and it was crazy. And I heard over one of their radios, it said, they breached the Capitol. They breached the Capitol. Well, if you're inside the Capitol and you're unrestricted, there are tunnels that get all over. And now, what people forget is that morning, there were 2 pipe bombs found. One behind the NRCC in the Capitol Hill Club, and the other at the DCCC, just a few blocks apart from one another and just a couple blocks from the Capitol. I walked past the NRCC that morning while that pipe bomb was sitting there, just less than 20 feet away. So it was a tense environment. Buildings were being evacuated already because of that pipe bomb and this and that. So I went back to the office, threw the deadbolt, and we texted some of our colleagues in other member offices and said, hey, we've got an empty office. If your office building's being evacuated and you need someplace to shelter, come to our office. So we ended up with 2 Tennessee offices and a Louisiana office in our office. And it was in the middle of COVID, we weren't wearing masks. So had the windows open for ventilation. Well, that was a mistake because our eyes started to burn from all the tear gas and the bear spray and all that stuff just across the street. And so all that was going on. I'm texting Tim, like, what are you doing? Are you okay? He's not responding. Finally, I make contact with him. Next thing I know, Congressman Lou Correa busts in our door and says, where's this man's chief of staff? And I said, I'm Congressman's chief of staff, sir. He said, Tim Burchett's a hero. This is a Democrat member of Congress. He said, Tim Burchett's a hero. I said, well, I think a lot of them, sir. He said, no, he's a hero. He said, he made sure every single person around him was okay and safe and escorted to safety. He was praying with people, and he refused to leave the House floor until everybody was safe.
It's amazing.
It's amazing. And listen, Tim Burchett isn't everybody's cup of tea, but I will tell you one thing, he's not a coward. And one thing, no matter what you think of Tim, is he's going to tell you what he thinks. He's going to stand up for what he believes in. And I mean, that's just who he is. That's who his dad raised him to be. It's who his mom raised him to be.
But you make it back home. What are you doing now?
So now I've started my own consulting firm. I do a little bit of government relations and business development, but ultimately it's all about the same stuff, right? Politics, journalism, and consulting. It's all about people. It's all about relationships. And so, I'm helping businesses and nonprofits be connected to the government or be connected with each other or overcome policy obstacles that might be getting in their way of doing the work that they're intended to do. And
how's it going as an entrepreneur?
Oh, it's been the scariest and the scared and most blessed I've ever been.
I gotta say, man, I'm really proud of you.
I appreciate it.
What have you learned about possibility? What have you learned about going from terrorizing Oak Ridge to being an entrepreneur and a valued member of our community?
It goes back to my mom. It goes back to Mike Cohen. It goes back to Tim. It goes back to you and Chris. It goes back to people that I've just been fortunate to surround myself with. And that is, you can do anything if you've got people behind you who believe you can do it. Because you believe and you believe in and you can dream for what you can see. And sometimes we can't see our own possibilities. We can't see our own capabilities, but other people can. And it's from your faith, from my faith, and God saying, you can do this because I got this, right? Or somebody like Mike Cohen saying, oh, you've got all the skills you need to do this work. You're good. Or Larson J., I can remember riding in the car with Larson and talking about, oh, I'm so afraid to start my own business. This was 3 years ago. And he's like, look, do this, this, and this. You can do it. It's the hardest part is getting out of your own head. It's that sort of thing. It's talking to people. It's opening up. That to me is probably the biggest thing over the years that has been my takeaway that I wouldn't change.
Well, thanks for being proof positive that anything is possible.
It is.
Michael Ryder, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Howard.